I was standing on this front porch with nothing but the breath freezing in my lungs, my father's voice still echoing in my ears like a slammed door. Moments earlier, he'd stared at me across the glowing Christmas table and said, "You don't belong here. Get out." My stepmother Melanie smiled like she'd been waiting for that moment all night. My half-sister Rachel laughed into her wine glass. I had walked through snow in a red sweater I'd worn every Christmas since Mom died, carrying a tiny wrapped candle I'd bought with the last few dollars in my account, thinking maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. But their eyes didn't soften. Their hands didn't hesitate. My father opened the door, gestured outside, and said it again, louder this time. Out. He didn't give me a penny. He didn't ask if I had somewhere to go. Melanie called after me. "Merry Christmas, poor girl," as if the words were a punchline. When I stepped out, the cold hit my skin like punishment. Snow fell in slow, heavy flakes, and when the door shut behind me, it was gentle, too gentle for what it had done. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. Not the kind that breaks, but the kind that wakes. I walked down the front steps as if my body had already made the decision my heart wasn't ready to say aloud. The neighborhood shimmered with lights and garland, every house glowing with warmth and togetherness. Mine had just expelled me as if I were an intruder. I held on to the small candle in my pocket, felt its shape through the fabric, and wondered whether Mom had ever imagined her only daughter spending Christmas night alone on a frozen sidewalk. The farther I got from the house, the easier it became to breathe. The air hurt, but it was honest. I stopped beneath a street lamp light flickering above me and tried to steady my hands. Mom used to hold them when they shook cold nerves fear didn't matter. She'd squeeze them until I felt grounded again. I hadn't felt grounded in years. Not since she died. Not since Melanie moved in. Not since my father let someone else replace every picture of Mom on the mantel within weeks. My boots cracked against the icy pavement as I walked toward the bus stop. I wasn't sure where I was going. My apartment was across town, small, drafty, barely furnished, but it was mine. At least no one there would look at me the way Melanie did, like I was a stain that wouldn't wash out. I breathed slowly, pulling my coat tighter as the wind cut across my cheek. I hated that I felt more ashamed than angry. It shouldn't have been shame. I hadn't done anything except exist in a home that no longer wanted me. When I reached the bus stop, the bench was covered in snow. I brushed it off and sat wiping my face with the sleeve of my coat. Across the street, a couple exited a SUV loaded with gifts, laughing as they hurried inside to warmth and music. I didn't envy them. But the sight stung more than the wind did. I leaned back against the cold metal frame and closed my eyes. For the first time that night, the silence around me began to settle, and in that quiet, something surfaced. A memory. Mom's voice on her last night in the hospital, soft but insistent. "Emma, keep this with you. Don't lose it. One day you'll need it." She had slipped a small silver card into my hand wrapped in tissue paper. I never asked what it was. I couldn't. She was too weak, and I didn't want to add anything heavy to her fading breath. My fingers moved before my mind caught up. I opened my bag and dug through the pockets until I found the tiny envelope I'd carried for years. The tissue was worn thin now. I unwrapped it with care, and the silver card glinted under the street lamp. No name. No numbers. Just a faint emblem, one I didn't recognize. The cold didn't matter anymore. My heart knocked against my ribs as if waking up. I turned the card over, tracing the smooth edge with my thumb. Why had she given this to me? Why did she say I'd need it? I held it up toward the light, and for the first time since leaving the house, a thought stronger than sadness flickered through me. Mom knew something I didn't. I exhaled slowly, watching the cloud form in the air. My father's voice no longer echoed in my mind. Instead, I heard Mom's last words. Words I hadn't thought about in years. Nothing you lose tonight will be gone forever. The bus approached in the distance, headlights cutting through the snowfall. I tucked the silver card into my coat close to my chest. I didn't understand what it was, but I knew deep down in the place grief couldn't reach that tonight wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. When the bus doors opened, warm air brushed my skin. I stepped inside without looking back at the house on Maple Ridge Lane. I wasn't going back there again. The bus ride felt longer than it should have, even though the city was quiet and the roads were nearly empty. I sat near the back, holding the silver card in my gloved hand, running my thumb across its smooth surface again and again. Snow streaked the windows, blurring every streetlight into soft yellow halos. I watched them pass like scenes from someone else's life. Warm living rooms, decorated trees, families gathered with laughter. None of it belonged to me anymore. Maybe it never had. When the bus reached my stop, I stepped out into a gust of wind that sliced straight through my coat. My apartment building sat at the end of a dimly lit block, the kind of place where a hallway light flickered more often than it stayed on. I pushed open the front door, climbed the narrow stairs, and unlocked Unit 3B. The hinges groaned softly as I entered the small space I called home. My living room was barely bigger than a storage closet, with one thrifted couch, a chipped coffee table, and a lamp that leaned to one side. Still, it felt safer than the house I grew up in, a house filled with eyes that judged and hands that pushed me out the door on Christmas night. I closed the door behind me, leaned my back against it, and let the silence wash over me. I set the silver card on the table and walked to the tiny kitchenette. My breath came out uneven, and the ache in my chest settled deeper than the cold outside. I filled a glass with water, but my hands shook too much to drink. I placed it down and rubbed my fingers across my forehead, forcing myself to breathe. Melanie's voice echoed in my mind. "You don't belong here. Get out." What stung wasn't the words, it was how easily my father had agreed. I walked back to the table and stared at the card again. My mother had given it to me 2 weeks before she died, her fingers so thin they barely held my hand. I always thought she meant it as a sentimental keepsake, something to remember her by. But tonight it felt different. Heavier. Intentional. Like she had planned something. I sat on the couch and closed my eyes, letting memories surface whether I wanted them to or not. I remembered Melanie moving in when I was around 12, her perfume filling the house, her voice everywhere, her hands rearranging our home until it stopped looking like Mom's. She'd replaced the floral curtains Mom loved with heavy gray drapes, threw out old family photos because they were clutter, bought new furniture and called it a fresh start. Dad didn't object. He never did once Melanie smiled at him the right way. I remembered sitting at the staircase one evening listening to them talk in the kitchen. Their voices were sharp quiet, then sharp again. Something about a file she refuses to sign. Something about not letting her ruin everything. When I'd stepped into the room, Melanie's smile had snapped back on like a mask. Later that night, I found Mom alone in her bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands trembling. She'd said she was tired. She never told me what they'd asked her to sign. The wind outside howled, rattling the thin windows. I opened my eyes and picked up the silver card again. The emblem was simple, a faint image of a lighthouse. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't a credit card, a debit card, or anything like the IDs my mom used to carry. It was something else entirely. A sound pinged beside me. My phone screen lit up. A text from an unknown number. "Don't look into it. Stop now." My breath froze. I read it again, hands trembling. No name, no details, just a warning. Or a threat. I jumped up from the couch and checked the locks on my door. Nothing looked disturbed. The hallway outside was silent. The message couldn't possibly be about the card unless someone knew I had it. My heart thudded. I grabbed the phone and typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I blocked the number and turned the phone face down, but the dread stayed lodged under my ribs. I needed answers. Real ones. Not from memories. Not from fear. From Mom. I took my laptop from the counter and sat at the table, placing the silver card beside me, like it was a key because it felt like one. I opened my email and searched for anything Mom might have left behind. Nothing new appeared, but I scrolled deeper further back than I normally had reason to look. And there it was. An email buried under years of newsletters and old junk mail, sent when I was 15. I had never opened it. The subject line was simple: "Keep this safe." My pulse quickened. I clicked it. Inside was a single sentence: "If something happens to me, use the card. Only when you truly need it." The air seemed to thin around me. My mother had known something was wrong. She had known I'd need this card someday, and she had known I wouldn't be protected when that day came. A sharp knock jolted me upright. 3 knocks. Firm. Deliberate. I froze. No one visited me. Not at this hour. Not on Christmas night. I picked up the silver card with one hand and edged toward the door. My breath shook as I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but on the floor leaning against my doorframe was an envelope. No stamp, no address, just my name. Emma. I didn't touch it at first. I stood there staring at the loop of the E, the careful handwriting. It wasn't Dad's. It wasn't Melanie's. It wasn't Rachel's. It was my mother's. I picked it up slowly, feeling the heat leave my fingertips. Inside was a folded note. Her handwriting again. "If you have this, they've already pushed you out. Go to Lighthouse Bank. Use the card. Trust only what I left behind." My knees nearly gave out. My mother had known everything, every betrayal, every danger, every truth. I was only beginning to understand. And now the path she left for me had just begun. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my couch with the silver card in one hand and the envelope from my mother in the other, listening to the refrigerator hum and the wind whistle through the thin window panes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face at the dinner table, cold, distant, already gone from me long before he threw me out. And underneath that image, like a quiet current, was a deeper truth I didn't want to name yet. Mom had known they would push me out. She had predicted it, planned for it, tried to warn me from a distance she never should have had to cross. When the sky finally shifted from black to a faint gray, I stood, grabbed my coat, and wrapped the card inside my glove. My apartment felt too small to think in, too full of air that didn't belong to me anymore. I locked the door behind me and stepped into the crisp morning. Snow was falling lightly, coating the cars along the curb in white powder. I didn't have a car. I hadn't driven since Mom died. My father had taken the one she left me, saying it was more practical for Rachel to use it. I walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, the street quiet except for the crunch of my boots. My breath hovered in clouds before fading into the cold. I kept replaying the unknown text message from the night before. "Don't look into it. Stop now." Whoever sent it wanted me scared. They didn't realize fear was the only thing I'd been running on for years. The bus arrived with a soft groan. I boarded, sat near the window, and watched the city shift from sleepy to stirring. My fingers curled around the silver card in my pocket as if it were a heartbeat. Every part of me felt pulled forward by a force stronger than dread. This was the first time since Mom died that I wasn't letting someone else decide what I should know. When I got off near downtown, the cold bit harder. The city was slowly waking shop owners scraping snow from sidewalks, a few early commuters rushing with coffee cups, streetlights blinking off one by one. I followed my phone's map to Lighthouse Bank. It was on a corner near the river, a tall building made of pale stone, its windows tinted and reflective. A carved emblem, a lighthouse, sat above the main doors, the same emblem on the silver card. I hesitated at the entrance. My mother had walked into this bank at some point. She had arranged something here, something she didn't want Melanie or Dad to touch, something she entrusted only to me. Inside, warm air hit me like a soft wave. The lobby smelled faintly of cedar and pine from the tall Christmas tree decorated near the window. A woman in a navy blazer greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning. How can we help you today?" My voice felt fragile when it came out. I need to access something. I have a card." She gestured toward a private counter. "Mr. Lewis can assist you." My boots echoed softly as I walked across the polished floor. Mr. Lewis was in his late 50s with silver hair and a gentle expression. He stood when I approached. "Good morning. What can I do for you?" I placed the silver card on the counter. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Not shock recognition. "Where did you get this?" "It was my mother's," I said. "She gave it to me before she passed." Something shifted in his posture, a subtle straightening. "One moment, please." He took the card, inserted it into a small device connected to his computer, and typed a series of commands. I watched his face instead of the screen. His brows knit. His eyes sharpened. His jaw tightened. He leaned closer to the monitor, then glanced at me with a look that sent a chill down my spine. "This card is tied to a legacy account," he said quietly. "It's unusual. Extremely unusual." He hesitated. "I'm going to need to bring up more information." My pulse thudded loudly in my ears. "Is there a problem?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he clicked something and a loading bar appeared on the screen. The hum of the machine filled the silence. Then the loading bar reached 100%. The color drained from his face. He stood abruptly, his chair rolling back into the wall. "Miss, you need to see this." He turned the monitor slightly in my direction. I stepped closer, bracing myself. The number on the screen was so large I blinked twice, convinced I misread it. The balance wasn't a savings account. It wasn't a trust fund. It was a fortune. "That can't be mine," I whispered. "It is," Mr. Lewis replied softly. "Your mother established this account over 15 years ago, and there's more." He scrolled down. My stomach sank as I saw another detail. The account had been frozen 10 years earlier. The day after she died, he added. "Frozen by who?" The question formed in my mind before I could ask it. But Mr. Lewis answered anyway. Someone with administrative access attempted to take control of the account multiple times. They were denied. Each attempt was logged. My hands trembled. "Who?" He pointed to a name at the bottom of the audit log. Not Melanie. Not Clinton Wade. My father. I stepped back, the world tilting. Mr. Lewis lowered his voice. "Your mother must have trusted you deeply. This account was designed so only the original physical card could unlock it. No digital access. No override." I stared at the silver card, suddenly heavy in my pocket. My mother hadn't just left me a key. She had left me a weapon. Protection. A shield against the people who would take from her. And now from me. "Miss, there's also a sealed note on file," he said. "Your mother left it for whoever accessed this account first." My breath caught. "A note." "Yes. Would you like us to retrieve it?" I nodded slowly. And for the first time that morning, I felt something new break through the cold inside me. Not fear, not sadness. Resolve. I walked out of the bank holding nothing but a thin envelope with my mother's handwriting on it, and a truth I wasn't prepared for. The sky had shifted from soft gray to a dull metallic white, the kind that warned of another round of snow. Cars passed slowly on the wet street, their tires hissing. I stood on the sidewalk, staring down at the envelope, unable to move. The city felt too large around me, too loud, even in its morning quiet. My father had tried to take the money my mother left for me. He had frozen the account the day after she died. Every attempt to access it had been logged under his name. My throat tightened as I tucked the envelope inside my coat and started walking. Each step felt heavy, my boots crunching over patches of ice as if pressing down on years of things I hadn't allowed myself to see. When I reached my apartment building, the hallway light flickered again, humming weakly above me. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the warmth doing nothing to ease the cold that had settled under my skin. I placed the envelope on the coffee table but didn't open it yet. Instead, I walked to the window and stared out at the street below. A man in a dark coat walked by, hands in his pockets. For a moment I wondered if he was watching me. Paranoia wasn't my usual instinct, but after the strange message last night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew what I'd done this morning. I turned back toward the table and picked up the silver card. I ran my thumb across its surface, the faint lighthouse emblem catching the light. This wasn't just a card. It was a map, a warning, a final gift from a woman who knew her family better than I ever did. I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a folded page, yellowed slightly at the edges. Mom's handwriting leaned slightly to the right, delicate but sure. She'd written, "Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've stepped into a truth I hoped would never reach you. I'm sorry, I tried to stop it. But I need you to be brave now. Lighthouse Bank has what you will need, but the rest is somewhere only you can go." My breath caught. Mom wasn't just protecting money, she was protecting information, the kind of information that threatened someone enough for them to want to bury her. I set the letter down, closed my eyes, and let myself drift back into the memories I'd spent years pushing aside. I remembered the first time Melanie walked into our home, a bright smile, perfect hair, perfume so strong it filled every room. She hugged my father like she'd known him for years. But the moment she looked at me, her smile never reached her eyes. At first it was small things. My favorite blanket disappearing. Mom's framed photos packed into boxes. A family tradition updated or improved by Melanie's standards. And always with a sweet tone. "We need to move forward, dear." But as time passed, her grip tightened. She reorganized our home office. She insisted on handling all the bills. She urged Dad to merge accounts for simplicity. She'd hover behind him as he worked late into the night, whispering suggestions I couldn't hear. Then there were the fights. The ones where Mom's voice trembled. The ones where Dad shouted about responsibility and loyalty. The ones where Melanie stayed eerily silent. I didn't understand any of it then. I was just a teenager watching a family unravel thread by thread. But now I saw it clearly. Mom wasn't paranoid. She was outnumbered. I placed the letter back into the envelope and tried to steady my breathing. There was something else I needed to revisit. Something I hadn't allowed myself to think about until now. The garage. I remembered a night years ago when I came home early from school. The garage door was half open, and inside Dad and Melanie stood over a table piled with papers and a blue folder. They were arguing in hushed voices. When I stepped into the room, Melanie snapped the folder shut so fast the papers inside shifted. Dad's face went pale. He grabbed the folder, muttered something about adult business, and ushered me out. The label on the folder had been simple, just 2 letters and a number, MH12. Mom Harwood. 12 files. 12 years. Or something else entirely. The same label had appeared in the bank logs today. A sharp knock jolted me back. I froze. No one ever visited me unannounced. Not here. Not in this place where no one even knew my last name. My heart hammered as I approached the door. I didn't look through the peephole this time. I opened it an inch. Dad's voice came through the crack. "Emma, open the door." My entire body stiffened. I didn't open it wider. "How did you know where I live?" There was a beat of silence. "We need to talk." "We," I repeated. I heard her then. Melanie, standing right beside him. "I know you accessed the account," she said. "This is going too far." I closed the door until only a sliver of light came through. "Stay away from me." Dad's voice softened, but it wasn't comforting. It was controlled. "Emma, you don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. You're making a mistake. A mistake." The same word he used when he pushed Mom away. The same word he used last night before he kicked me out. I lifted my chin. "You made your choice years ago. I'm making mine now." "Emma." He started, but I pushed the door shut and locked it. Their silhouettes lingered behind the frosted glass for a long moment before fading. I stepped away from the door, my pulse racing. Mom's letter trembled in my hand. Whatever she feared was still alive. And now it was coming for me. Tom's voice echoed down the narrow hallway before I even realized he was calling my name. "Emma!" he shouted, breathless as his footsteps pounded closer. I stepped out of the locker's shadow just as he appeared at the end of the row, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes wide with urgency. For a split second, I froze. I hadn't seen him in years, not since my mother's funeral yet. Here he stood as if summoned by the past itself. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice a whisper in the cold metal corridor. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over his shoulder as if expecting someone else to appear behind him. Then he motioned me back inside the storage unit and pulled the metal door halfway shut. "Your mother told me," he said quietly. "She said that if anything ever happened to her, you'd come here eventually, and that I needed to be ready." The locker smelled like old paper and cold steel, a scent that pulled memories out of me with painful ease. The cartons, folders, and notebooks stacked in front of us felt like pieces of her mind frozen in time. I picked up a sealed envelope labeled in Mom's handwriting. "For Emma, open first." I sat on the concrete floor and unfolded the letter carefully. Every line trembled as I read. "Emma, if you're reading this, then they've finally pushed you out. I'm sorry. I knew this day would come. I'm leaving you the truth even if it hurts. Lighthouse Bank holds the account they can't touch, but the rest, everything that explains why they're hidden here." My throat tightened, the words blurred. Mom had been preparing me for something I didn't know existed. She had feared something long before her death, something she couldn't say aloud in our own home. Tom knelt beside me, his hands clasped tightly. "Your mother tried to protect you," he said, "but she didn't trust the people in that house. Not anymore." I looked up at him sharply. "You knew about Melanie?" He nodded slowly. "I knew she wasn't what she pretended to be. Your mother confided in me near the end. She was terrified Melanie was influencing your father and influencing their finances." A shock went through me, but the more he said, the less surprised I felt. Something inside me had known this for a long time. The late-night arguments, the way Mom avoided certain rooms when Melanie was home, the way my father stopped listening to her altogether. I opened the next item, another small envelope. Inside was a black USB drive and a folded slip of paper in my mother's handwriting. "Listen only when you're alone." I plugged it into my laptop with shaking hands. Static filled the unit at first, then my mother's voice emerged, weak, breathless, but steady enough to pierce me straight through. "If you're hearing this, I couldn't tell you in person. Someone's been watching me. I'm worried someone has access to our devices. Your father, he's not the man you grew up with. And Melanie, she's pushing him toward decisions he doesn't understand." My heart pounded as her voice cracked slightly. "I found irregularities in the company accounts. Money moving where it shouldn't. When I questioned it, they pressured me to sign papers. I refused. I think they'll try again. If anything happens to me..." "Emma, don't trust them." Static swallowed the rest, cutting her off mid-breath. I sat still, my hands numb. Tom didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth hung between us like a cold fog, heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. My mother hadn't died peacefully. She had died surrounded by people who wanted silence. I opened the large cardboard box next. Inside were dozens of documents, bank statements with missing signatures, emails, printed and highlighted transfers between shell companies with names I didn't recognize. One folder was labeled in neat, scared handwriting, MH12, the same code I saw years ago in the garage, the same blue folder Melanie snatched from the table. I opened it. Inside were financial documents detailing transactions Melanie had approved using Dad's authority. Some transfers routed through a company named Monroe Holdings, something Mom had circled in red ink. Next to it, she had written, "Why are they involved?" I swallowed hard. Mom knew they were stealing, I whispered. But she didn't know why. Tom placed his hand gently on the edge of the box. She was getting close. Too close. At the bottom was a medical file, my mother's hospital report, but the signature line for the attending physician was blank. Mom had written a single note on a sticky tab. "Ask why missing." My stomach twisted. Was it an oversight? Or intentional? Tom exhaled slowly. "Emma, your mother didn't believe her decline was natural. She told me she felt poisoned." The word hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my palm against the cold floor, trying to steady myself. No, she was sick. She had complications. "She thought someone tampered with her medication," Tom said softly. "She couldn't prove it. But she feared it." My breath stuttered in my chest. I wanted to reject it, to push it away, but deep down, I'd known something was wrong. Mom had been healthy. Then suddenly she wasn't. And Melanie had taken control of her appointments, her pills, her meals, her access to Dad. My pulse hammered painfully. I forced myself to open the last item in the crate, a small metal key shaped like a swallow, old and worn. "What is this?" I murmured. Tom stared at it with recognition. "A safety deposit key. But not for this bank. Westline uses the swallow crest. Whatever your mother couldn't keep here, she hid there." I held the key in my palm, feeling the weight of everything my mother had carried alone. Before I could say anything else, footsteps echoed outside the locker. Slow. Measured. Heavy. Tom motioned for silence. We froze. A shadow passed under the thin slit beneath the door. Someone was out there. Someone looking for us. Tom leaned close, voice barely audible. "We need to leave. Now." But before we could move, the doorknob rattled violently, and a voice I didn't recognize snarled on the other side. "Open it. She's in there." My heart stopped cold. Tom pressed a finger to his lips and stepped silently toward the back of the storage unit, scanning for another way out. The handle rattled again, harder this time, each metallic jolt echoing through my bones. I clutched the swallow-shaped key in my hand, my pulse hammering against my skin. Whoever was outside wasn't guessing. I was certain they knew exactly where I was. Tom motioned for me to follow. He pushed aside a tall plastic shelving unit, revealing a narrow maintenance door I hadn't noticed before. He whispered, "Stay close and be quiet." I nodded, though my legs trembled. Another bang shook the main door, and a man's voice muttered, "Just break it." Tom didn't wait. He opened the maintenance door, ushered me inside, and pulled it shut behind us. We slipped into a dim, cold corridor lined with exposed pipes. The smell of rust and dust clung to the air. Tom guided me quickly through the narrow path, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing from the other side of the wall like approaching thunder. We emerged into a side alley behind the storage complex, the winter air biting into our faces. Snowflakes floated down, lazily, eerily calm compared to the chaos behind us. Tom grabbed my arm and hurried us toward his car, a dark green sedan tucked between two dumpsters. "Get in," he said. I didn't hesitate. As soon as the locks clicked, he started the engine and sped out of the alley. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The city blurred past, warehouse buildings, frozen fields, a lonely gas station. Only when we merged onto the main road did Tom finally exhale tension, leaving him in a visible wave. "You weren't supposed to be there alone," he said, voice low but firm. I stared at my hands in my lap. "You didn't know I was going." "I knew you'd go eventually," he replied. "Just not today, not without warning." The silence stretched. Snow tapped lightly against the windshield, a soft counterpoint to the storm rising inside me. "Tom," I finally said. "Who were those men?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice held something heavy, guilt or fear or both. "People who don't want the truth coming out," he said. "Your mother warned me this might happen. That if she was gone, the people who pressured her would keep their eyes on you." I inhaled sharply, pressured her to do what? To stay quiet, he said. To sign papers she didn't want to sign. To hand over things she refused to give up. The pieces clicked together in my mind with painful clarity. My mother wasn't merely being cautious. She was being hunted quietly, strategically, and now they had shifted their attention to me. "Why did she trust you?" I asked, my voice trembling. Tom's expression softened for the first time since we left the storage unit. "Your mom and I worked together for years. She knew I wouldn't let her secrets be buried. And she knew your father was compromised." Those last words landed hard. Compromised how I asked. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "He owed people money. Your mother discovered financial ties between him and someone named Clinton Wade, a man who isn't exactly known for clean business practices. Melanie brought Clinton into the picture years ago." My stomach nodded. "So she didn't just change the house. She changed him. She shaped him," Tom corrected quietly. "Your father started relying on Clinton's advice. And once Melanie had her hooks in him, he stopped listening to anyone else. Including your mother." The truth hit me harder than the cold wind outside. "So they teamed up against her," I whispered. Tom nodded. "And when she refused to sign documents that would give them access to her independent assets, things escalated." I pressed a hand to my forehead, shaking. "Is that why she made the trust? Why she left me the silver card?" "Yes," Tom said. "She saw the direction things were going. She knew she wouldn't be able to protect you if something happened to her." I swallowed hard. The truth was both clarifying and devastating. "Tom," I said slowly, "my mother died suddenly. She was healthy before. And that medication file, it's missing signatures." His eyes flickered. He'd been expecting this question. She suspected someone was tampering with her prescriptions. She never had proof, but she felt something was wrong. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The car felt too small, the air too thin. She told me, he continued, that if anything happened to her, someone would try to bury what she found. That's why she hid the documents in the storage unit. And why she gave you the silver card. I stared out the window, watching streetlights blur into streaks of gold. My whole life had been one long lie built around silence. A silence forced on the only person who ever loved me without conditions. The car slowed as we turned into an industrial district on the east side of town. Warehouses stood in long, dark rows, windows blacked out by grime. Tom parked behind an abandoned freight office and turned off the headlights. "What is this place?" I asked quietly. "Somewhere safer than your apartment," he replied, grabbing the box from the trunk. "Your mother trusted me with copies of some documents. She wanted you to see all of it when the time came." I followed him inside. The room smelled of old paper and metal, and the dim light flickered overhead. Tom placed the box on a table scratched by years of use. "This isn't just about your inheritance, Emma," he said. "Your mother uncovered something that scared powerful people. And the more she dug, the more dangerous it became." I hugged my coat closer. Dangerous how Tom looked me straight in the eyes. "They weren't just moving money," he said. "They were laundering it." The words struck the air like ice. "And your father signed off on some of it," he added. My breath caught my knees weak. I gripped the table to steady myself. "And Melanie?" I asked. Tom nodded grimly. "She was the one who brought Clinton Wade into your father's orbit. She knew exactly what she was doing." The room spun slightly. Betrayal had become a familiar ache, but this was something else, something deeper, something irreversible. Tom walked to a locked file cabinet and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "This," he said, setting it down gently, "is the part of the truth your mother couldn't hide in the storage unit. the part she trusted me to protect. Before I could reach for it, footsteps echoed outside the warehouse door. Tom's head snapped up. "They found us again," he whispered. A shadow moved past the frosted window, and this time whoever it was wasn't alone. Tom killed the lights with a sharp flick of his wrist, plunging the old freight office into a dim wash of moonlight leaking through the cracks in the boarded windows. My breath hitched. The footsteps outside grew slower, more deliberate, like whoever was there already knew we were inside and was deciding how to get in. "Stay behind me," Tom whispered. We crouched behind a metal shelf stacked with dusty binders. My heart thudded hard enough to make my hands shake. Another muffled voice joined the first low, impatient. Tom pressed his finger to his lips. "They're not leaving," he mouthed. The shadow passed across the window again. Whoever it was paused, then tried the door. The handle jiggled once, twice, then stopped. A scrape of metal followed, like someone testing the lock with something thin. My stomach twisted. They were trying to force their way in. Tom leaned close to my ear. "We can't stay here. Grab the box." I slipped the swallow-shaped key into my pocket and lifted the cardboard box filled with Mom's documents. It felt heavier now, not because of the weight, but because of the truth inside it. Tom guided me toward the back of the office, where a side exit led to a narrow ramp used for old delivery trucks. We slipped out quietly, snow crunching beneath our boots. The sky overhead was a thick gray, and the air had that electric stillness that comes right before another storm. Tom scanned the alley, then nodded for me to follow him to the car parked behind the loading dock. We climbed in, and he locked the doors as the engine rumbled to life. Only then did he finally speak. "They won't stop, Emma," he said. "Not after what we found in that locker." I didn't trust my voice yet, so I just nodded. The engine's warmth filled the cabin, slowly thawing my frozen fingers. But the cold inside me, fear, anger, disbelief, didn't melt. "What else is in the box?" I finally asked. Tom handed it to me. "You need to see this part now." I opened the lid again and pulled out the folder labeled MH12. At the bottom was a second envelope sealed with red wax, long cracked with age. I hadn't seen it in the storage unit. Maybe the panic had blinded me. Maybe my mother hid it deeper than I realized. The flap tore easily. Inside were copies of bank transfer logs, most of them stamped confidential. "These are from my mother's accounts," I said. Tom nodded. "Yes. And the ones circled in red, those are from a shell company controlled by Clinton Wade." I ran my fingers along the pages, each one more damning than the last. Transactions routed through Monroe Holdings, large sums disappearing without explanation, dates overlapping with the months before Mom fell ill. My voice cracked. She was trying to stop them. She was, Tom said quietly, and Clinton knew it. I looked up sharply. Why him? Why would he care about my mother's money? Tom leaned back, jaw clenched. "Because your mother knew Clinton was funneling money through your father's company. She found the pattern. She was planning to report it." The air in the car thickened. My pulse quickened. "So, Melanie, she wasn't just manipulating my father. She was connected to this." "She was the bridge between them," Tom said. "She introduced Clinton to your father. Then she made herself indispensable. That's how people like them work. They don't take power, they grow it around them until everyone else feels trapped." I swallowed hard, and my father let her. Tom didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. I pulled out another document, one I hadn't fully examined before. A handwritten timeline Mom had created. 14 entries, each dated, each describing something off. Entry 7 made my throat tighten. He brought her into the house. Everything changed. Entry 10. They want me to sign. I won't. Entry 13. If they realize what I know, I'm in danger. The last entry, dated 2 days before she died, was the shortest. Tom warned me. They know. My breath came out shaky. She was so scared. Tom rested a hand lightly on the box. She was brave. Terrified, yes. But brave. I closed my eyes. Mom's last weeks returned in pieces, the way she looked over her shoulder more often, how she flinched when the phone rang, how she cried once when she thought I was asleep. I'd been too young, too naive to understand any of it. She wanted you to have the truth, Tom said softly. She knew one day they'd push you the way they pushed her. I stared at the swallow key in my palm. This key, what does it unlock? And why did she hide it? Tom took a slow breath, studying the crest. Your mother used to keep a safety deposit box at Westline Security Bank. Before she married your father. Back when she still handled her finances independently. Before everything changed, I whispered. He nodded. If she moved something important out of the house, that's where she would have put it. My pulse quickened. Something important like what? His expression darkened. Something she couldn't risk leaving behind. Something she feared could get her killed. The wind outside picked up, rattling the car windows. I tightened my hand around the key. We have to go there. Not tonight, Tom said firmly. It's too dangerous. Whoever was at the storage unit will be looking for you now. We need to stay ahead of them. I leaned back, sinking into the seat. Exhaustion weighed on me, but so did clarity. For the first time in years, the pieces of my life were forming a picture, one built on betrayal, money power, and a woman who'd tried desperately to protect me. The car rolled to a stop at a red light. Snow drifted past the windshield like silent ash. Emma, Tom said quietly. I looked at him. You need to understand something before we go any further. What? He held my gaze steady and somber. Your mother didn't die because she was sick. She died because she knew too much. The light turned green, and just as the car moved forward, headlights flashed in the rearview mirror, a black sedan pulling up behind us. The same one from earlier. Tom muttered a curse. They've found us again. The black sedan didn't follow at first. It just sat there behind us at the light, its headlights piercing through the back windshield, too bright, too deliberate. Tom kept both hands tight on the wheel, his jaw clenched hard enough that a vein pulsed along his temple. The green light stretched longer than it should have, or maybe time just slowed with fear. Only when Tom accelerated did the sedan pull forward. They're matching our speed, I whispered. I see them, he replied, voice low and controlled, but edged with the kind of tension that told me he had been expecting this moment. We made a sharp right turn. The sedan followed. We switched lanes. It switched too. Tom muttered, They're not subtle. My fingers dug into the fabric of my coat as the weight of the box pressed against my legs. Every document, every file, everything Mom tried to protect felt suddenly fragile. If they caught us now, everything she died for would vanish with us. Tom finally shook his head, exhaled and said, We're not leading them to your apartment, or to Westline Bank. He made another turn, parking abruptly in the shadow of an old delivery warehouse. The sedan sped past headlights sweeping over us, but not stopping. They hadn't realized we'd pulled off the road. Tom cut the engine. Silence rushed in like a wave. We confront them tomorrow, he said. Tonight we deal with someone else. I turned to him, heart still hammering. Who your father? He said. Before he does something even worse. The name hung between us like smoke. He drove us back toward Maple Ridge, each passing streetlight casting long shadows across the dashboard. My father's neighborhood glowed with Christmas lights still blinking warm and soft, as if the world inside those houses was safe, kind, normal. It made the truth inside me feel sharper. When we pulled up a block away from the house I'd been thrown out of my breath caught. A wreath hung on the front door. The windows glowed a cozy gold. Anyone driving by would think a family lived there. But I knew better. That house wasn't a home. It was a stage, and my father had allowed Melanie to write every line of the script. Tom shut the car off and turned to me. You don't go in alone. Okay? I didn't answer. I was already opening the door. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked down the familiar sidewalk, the same path I'd walked as a child holding Mom's hand. The same path I'd walked last night carrying a candle they never cared to receive. Tom followed closely, his footsteps steady behind me. I knocked. The door opened within seconds as if someone had been standing right behind it. And there he was, my father. He looked older than he had yesterday, his eyes rimmed red like he hadn't slept. But the moment he saw me, something in his expression hardened. "Emma," he said, voice flat. I stepped inside without waiting for him to invite me. The warmth of the house hit my skin instantly, but it didn't touch the cold inside my chest. Melanie appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face tightening when she saw Tom. "Well, she said this is bold." Rachel sat on the couch, phone in hand. Her smile died when she saw the box in my arms. Dad closed the door behind us. "Emma, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have gone through Mom's account," I replied. A flicker of something anger crossed his face. "You're making assumptions you don't understand." Tom stepped forward. "She understands more than you think." Melanie's eyes narrowed. "You?" I should have known. Tom didn't bother responding. He simply set his bag down and crossed his arms. I placed the box on the table. "Mom left this for me. Everything in here proves what you and Melanie have been doing. The money laundering, the forged signatures, the attempts to freeze her assets after she died." Rachel stood up quickly. "That's a lie." I didn't raise my voice. "Your name is on some of the transfers, Rachel." Her mouth snapped shut. Dad walked toward the table, but Tom blocked him with a single step. Something flickered in Dad's eyes, shame or desperation, I couldn't tell. I pulled out the USB Mom had hidden. I heard her recording. I know she was scared. I know she thought someone was watching her. I know she believed her medication was tampered with. Melanie let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, please. She was losing it long before." "Shut up," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could think. It wasn't loud. It wasn't hysterical. It was steady, cold, grounded exactly like Mom had been when she was finally tired of lies. The room froze. Dad rubbed his forehead. "Emma, you're blowing things out of proportion." I opened another folder and held it out. "These are your signatures. Approving transfers into shell companies. Approving disbursements to Monroe Holdings. Approving payments to Clinton Wade." Dad's jaw clenched. "I was trying to save the company." "You were letting them use your company," Tom said quietly. "And when your wife found out, they pressured her to stay quiet." Melanie scoffed, but her hands shook around the dish towel. I looked directly at Dad. "You let them push her out. And then you pushed me out too." His face crumpled slightly. "I was trying to protect you." "By throwing me out on Christmas," I asked. "By freezing Mom's account. By choosing Melanie over the truth." He didn't answer. That silence was all I needed. Tom nudged the recorder on the table. "You might want to know we recorded everything you just said." Melanie inhaled sharply, took a step back. "You can't do this." I met her gaze. "You already did this. To my mother. To me." Rachel sank back onto the couch, face pale. Dad reached for me, then almost pleading. "Emma, stop this before it goes too far." "It already went too far," I said. "You made your choice. I'm making mine." Tom picked up the box. I walked to the door. Before stepping outside, I looked back at the man who raised me, who betrayed Mom, who betrayed me, who betrayed the truth. "You won't bury what she left behind," I said. "Not this time." And then I walked out into the falling snow, leaving the house and the people inside it behind me for the last time. The wind stung my face the moment I stepped outside, but it felt cleaner than the air inside that house. Tom locked the car doors as I slid into the passenger seat, my hands still trembling from everything that had exploded in the living room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The street was quiet, lined with decorated homes glowing warmly in the winter dusk. But all I could hear was the faint echo of my father's voice. "Emma, stop this before it goes too far. It was too far years ago." Tom exhaled slowly and started the engine. "You handled yourself well in there." "I didn't feel like I did," I whispered. "You didn't scream. You didn't break. You told the truth. That's more strength than you know." I watched the house shrink behind us as Tom drove away. A shadow moved behind the curtains, Rachel maybe, or Melanie pacing in panic. I found no satisfaction in leaving them terrified, only clarity. Mom had fought alone. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. "Where do we go now?" I finally asked. Tom gripped the wheel. "We take the next step. We go public." My breath caught. Public as in news. Exposure. We can't let them bury this. Once it's out, they can't touch you. I swallowed, staring at the swallow-shaped key in my hand. But the evidence in that box isn't enough. It proves fraud, but not everything. "It's enough to start a fire," Tom said. "And we'll gather the rest before they can react." We drove in silence for a while, the car cutting through the falling snow. As we reached the end of the neighborhood, a sudden flash of headlights made Tom slow. A black sedan sat at the far end of the street, engine running, windows dark. The same sedan. My pulse spiked. "Tom." "I see it," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "Hold on." He turned sharply down a side street, avoiding the main road, keeping the car shielded by rows of tall hedges and snowbanks. Only when we were back on the highway did he speak again. "They're following us," I said, voice thin. "They're tracking you," Tom corrected. "And they won't stop until we control the narrative." I clutched the swallow key like a lifeline. "Mom really knew." "She did," Tom said. "She saw what they were capable of before either of us understood." My chest tightened. I thought back to the last Christmas before she died, the way she moved more slowly, the way she kept forgetting things, the way she apologized for everything. She'd told me, "There's more going on than you see." I hadn't understood then. I was a teenager desperate for stability. Now I could see the fear she'd been hiding. We pulled into a deserted industrial lot where Tom parked in the shadow of a half-collapsed loading dock. He turned off the headlights. The car hummed softly as he rested his elbows on the wheel. "Emma," he said quietly, "you need to understand what's happening. Your father wasn't just pressured. He was involved." I inhaled sharply. "You're saying he chose this? He chose Melanie. He chose Clinton Wade. He chose the money." Tom turned toward me. "Your mother refused to sign their documents. She threatened to expose them." And she was silenced. Whether he meant for it to go that far or not, he let it happen. A ringing filled my ears. I looked down at my hands, remembering the way Dad's voice used to sound in the mornings when he'd braid my hair before school. Remembering the way he'd held my hand after Mom died. Remembering how quickly he'd let Melanie erase her from our home. "He wasn't always like this," I whispered. "No," Tom agreed softly. "But he is now. And you can't keep protecting the man he used to be." A long moment stretched between us. Snow drifted across the windshield like dust. Finally, I forced myself to breathe. "So what now?" "We gather everything Tom said. Every record, every signature, every transfer your mother documented. Then we bring someone who can expose it properly. Someone we can trust," I asked. Tom nodded. "A reporter. Someone who won't be intimidated." A sudden buzzing broke the silence. My phone lit up, vibrating across the console. "Dad!" Tom shook his head sharply. "Don't answer." But the second call came immediately after, and then a text. "Don't go any further. You don't know what you're doing." Another followed. "You're not safe. Stop this now. And then, Emma, if you walk away, I can fix this. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of it. Fix this, I whispered. He's still lying. Even now. Tom reached over and gently pushed the phone face down. Control, he said. That's all this is. They're losing control. I wiped my face, though no tears had fallen. Let's finish what she started. Tom nodded once, decisive. We will. He shifted the car into gear and pulled onto the road. As we drove toward the city, the buildings rose taller lights flickering through the falling snow like small fires in the dark. Something inside me felt different now, steady, sharp, no longer afraid. Ahead, the black sedan merged onto the highway behind us, keeping its distance, but never letting us out of sight. Let them follow, I said quietly. They can watch us expose every secret they tried to bury. Tom glanced at me, and for the first time since he found me at the storage unit, he smiled. That's exactly what we're going to do. And with that, we drove into the storm carrying the truth my mother died to protect. Tom parked in an underground garage beneath an old newspaper building on the east side of the city, the kind of place where the air always smelled faintly of ink and cold metal. I carried the box against my chest, feeling every vibration of the elevator as it took us up to the 5th floor. My pulse thudded so loudly, I wondered if Tom could hear it. When the doors opened, we stepped into a dim hallway lined with faded photographs of reporters shaking hands with mayors, senators, even a few celebrities. Tom led me to a glass door with a bronze plaque, Marla Dunn, investigative reporter. He knocked once. A woman with short silver hair and sharp eyes opened the door. She didn't smile, but she didn't need to. Her gaze told me she noticed everything, the snow melting on our coats, the strain in my shoulders, the box in my arms, and the long night written in the corners of Tom's eyes. You must be Emma, she said. Her voice was low, calm, professional, but not cold. I nodded once. Thank you for meeting us. You said it was urgent, she replied. Come in. Her office was cluttered but organized, stacks of documents lining the walls, a map of the city peppered with colored pins, 3 monitors lit with spreadsheets and emails. She gestured to the chairs in front of her desk. Tom closed the blinds before we sat. Marla watched him, then looked at me. If he's shutting those, it means what you have is dangerous. So before we continue, I need one thing from you. What I asked. The truth, she said plainly. All of it. I placed the box on her desk. Then I hope you're ready. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in arrogance, but interest. Show me. I opened the box. The scent of old paper drifted out familiar and sharp. I pulled out the first folder, the one labeled MH12, and handed it to her. She flipped it open, scanning quickly, her eyes darting from line to line. The room fell silent except for the soft buzz of her desk lamp. She paused. This is a lot of money. Tom leaned forward. Keep going. She flipped to the next page. Her breath hitched softly. These signatures, these aren't consistent. Someone forged them. They were using my father's company to move funds, I said. My mother found out. Marla's eyes narrowed. And then she got sick. She didn't get sick, Tom replied tightly. She was poisoned. I swallowed hard but didn't look away. She suspected they were tampering with her medication. Her doctor's signature is missing from one of the files. Marla continued flipping through the documents faster now, her breath shallow. She pulled out the next folder, emails printed and highlighted by Mom, and then the USB. She plugged it into her computer. Do you know what's on this? She asked. My mother's recording, I said. The one she left before she died. Marla put on her headphones, pressed play, and listened. For a long moment, she didn't move. Not even when Mom's voice cracked. Not when she mentioned being watched. Not when she whispered, "If anything happens to me, don't trust them." Only when the recording ended did Marla slowly pull the headphones off. Her face looked different now, not hardened, but struck by something deeper. A weight. A responsibility. You're not exaggerating, she murmured. This is bigger than a family dispute. This is organized fraud. Shell companies, laundered funds, medical tampering, corporate infiltration. And if your mother was poisoned... She took a breath. This could become a federal case. A shiver ran down my spine. Will you help us? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to a filing cabinet at the back of the room. She pulled out a binder thick with previous investigations, banking scandals, political corruption, pharmaceutical crimes. She set it on the desk, then looked me directly in the eye. Emma, I don't just want to help you, she said. I want to expose whoever did this to your mother. I exhaled shakily. Relief and fear blurred together until I couldn't tell the difference. Tom nodded at her. What's our next move? Marla tapped her pen against the desk. We need evidence that connects all of this. Your father, Melanie Clinton Wade, and the money movement. And we need something irrefutable. Something they can't spin. The safety deposit box, I whispered. Tom's eyes sharpened. Westline Bank. Marla frowned. What's at Westline? I pulled the swallow-shaped key from my coat pocket and placed it on her desk. My mother hid something there. Something she couldn't leave in the house. Marla picked up the key, examining its weight. Then that's where we start. Before I could respond, a loud bang echoed from the hallway, sharp, metallic, urgent. We all froze. Another bang. Closer this time. Tom stood immediately. They followed us. Marla's face hardened. How Tom swore under his breath. They put a tracker on the car. The banging grew louder. Marla flipped off the lights. The office plunged into shadows. A silhouette passed behind the frosted glass of the door. A man's voice. Low. Open it. My heart slammed into my ribs. Tom grabbed my hand and whispered, When I say run, you run. Marla stepped behind her desk and pressed a hidden button beneath the drawer. A lock clicked somewhere near the back of the room. A hidden exit. Before I could move, the pounding stopped. Silence swept the hallway. Then the man outside whispered one word that turned my blood cold, Emma. My name. Spoken like a threat. Tom squeezed my hand. Run. He yanked open the hidden door behind Marla's bookshelf, and we sprinted into the darkness as the office door splintered behind us. The hidden corridor behind Marla's office was narrow and cold, lined with utility pipes and emergency wiring. Our footsteps echoed too loudly in the cramped space, every sound bouncing back like a warning. Tom's hand wrapped around my wrist, guiding me quickly through the maze of concrete. Marla followed close behind, carrying only her laptop and a small recorder. Behind us, muffled voices filled the office we'd just escaped from. A crash. A shout. Then another voice, one I recognized immediately. My father. Find her, he barked. The words sliced through me like a blade. Tom squeezed my wrist and whispered urgently, Don't look back. We pushed farther until the tunnel opened into a dimly lit stairwell. Marla rushed ahead, moving faster than I expected for someone her age. Down, she whispered. The garage connects to a side street. We can lose them. We descended quickly, our breaths turning to fog in the icy air. The stairwell reverberated with new sounds, boots hitting metal steps above us. They had found the route. Tom slowed just enough to lock eyes with me. Whatever happens, don't stop. My chest tightened. Tom, don't stop, he said again, and pulled me the rest of the way down. We reached the bottom and burst into the near-empty garage. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the rows of parked cars. Tom pointed toward a maintenance door near the far wall. That leads to an alley. If we make it there. A gunshot cracked through the garage. The sound ricocheted off the concrete, freezing me mid-step. Tom shoved me behind a pillar, shielding me with his body. Marla dived behind a sedan, her laptop clutched to her chest. Footsteps approached. A familiar voice rang out harsher than I'd ever heard it. "Emma, enough, Dad." My stomach flipped. The man who used to braid my hair. The man who taught me to ride a bike. The man who tossed me into the snow last night without a second thought. Now he was holding a gun. Tom whispered, "He won't shoot you." "That's not comforting," I whispered back. Marla signaled for silence. She peeked around the bumper, her expression tightening when she saw how close they were. Another voice joined Dad's deep, gravelly dripping with authority. "Clinton Wade. Get the girl," he snapped. "We can deal with the others later." Tom's eyes hardened. "We're running," he whispered. "Now." He grabbed my hand and we sprinted toward the maintenance door. Marla jumped up from behind the car and followed us, her boots sliding over the icy floor. We were halfway there when Dad shouted, "Stop, we didn't." Tom slammed into the metal door with his shoulder. It swung open, cold air flooding the garage. Snow whipped through the narrow alley outside. "Go!" Tom yelled. We rushed out into the blinding white. My lungs burned from the freezing air, my legs trembling from fear and exhaustion. The alley was narrow, bordered by tall brick walls that made it feel like a chute. Tom pulled me to the right toward the opening that led to the main street. Behind us, Dad and Clinton burst out of the garage. Dad's voice cracked, not with fear for me, but fear of losing control. Tom turned sharply into the main street where traffic crawled through the heavy snow. Marla reached for her phone. "I'm calling the station." But the phone slipped from her hand, landing in the slush with a sickening splash. Tom cursed. "We need to get off the street. West Line is 10 minutes from here. We can make it if we cut through the old textile district." "The bank," I gasped. "But they're following us." "They won't risk a crowd," he said. "And whatever your mother hid there might be the only thing that ensures your safety." I forced myself to nod, pushing away the fear clawing at my ribs. Tom's determination grounded me. We ran. We cut through a narrow walkway between shuttered stores, our breaths forming clouds that disappeared as quickly as they came. My boots slipped on icy patches, and Tom steadied me each time without slowing. Marla kept pace surprisingly well, her expression focused fierce. Behind us, footsteps pounded the pavement. They were gaining. Tom pulled a sudden left into a parking lot behind an abandoned diner. "Shortcut," he said. "Trust me, I did. I didn't have a choice." We climbed over a low fence boot, scraping metal. My hair whipped across my face as we crossed another alley, then another. The city felt like a labyrinth built to test how far we could run before collapsing. Finally, the skyline shifted. A tall stone building rose ahead, its nameplate barely visible through the snow. West Line Security Bank. My heartbeat surged. We made it. A black sedan screeched into the street behind us. Clinton stepped out first. Dad stepped out second. Both advanced slowly. Tom positioned himself between them and me. Marla stood beside him, clutching her recorder like a weapon made of truth rather than steel. Clinton's voice echoed across the snow. "You should have walked away, Emma." Dad added, "Please, come home. We can fix this." I walked forward, stopping a few feet from Tom. "No," I said. "You can't fix what you broke." Clinton scoffed. "You think anyone will believe you over us? One scared girl and a washed-up accountant?" Tom didn't move. "She has evidence." Clinton's smirk twisted into something uglier. "Then she won't have it for long." I felt the swallow-shaped key in my pocket. I took a deep breath. "No," I said. "I'll have everything." Dad opened his mouth to speak, but something behind us stopped him. A security guard from West Line Bank stepped out of the building, hand on his radio, eyes narrowed. Clinton froze. Dad stepped back. Tom touched my shoulder lightly. "Inside. Now." We rushed past the guard through the tall glass doors into the warmth of the marble lobby. Outside, Dad pounded a fist against the glass, but he couldn't follow. Not here. Not now. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. Mom's key had brought me to the one place they couldn't reach. And whatever she left inside this bank, it was time to uncover it. The warmth of Westline's marble lobby felt unreal after the chaos outside. Snow still clung to my coat, melting onto the polished floor in small droplets that glittered under the overhead lights. A guard guided us toward a private hallway without asking questions, his eyes flicking nervously toward the glass doors where my father and Clinton Wade stood trapped outside, their silhouettes warped by the falling snow. Tom kept a hand on my shoulder as we followed the guard deeper into the bank. Marla walked beside me, gripping her recorder like she feared it might vanish. My pulse thudded in my ears, each step carrying me closer to whatever truth my mother had hidden here years ago. The guard stopped at a steel door and gestured. "Manager Reeves will meet you inside." We stepped into a small office with thick, soundproof walls. A man in his 60s, impeccably dressed and calm in a way only seasoned bankers could be, rose from behind his desk. His nameplate read H. Reeves. He closed the blinds before speaking. "Miss Harwood, I've been expecting you." My stomach tightened. "Expecting me?" "Yes." He folded his hands. "Your mother left specific instructions. If you ever arrived with that key," his gaze dropped to the swallow-shaped key in my hand, "I was to grant you immediate access. No questions asked." Tom and Marla exchanged glances. Reeves stood, reached for a small locked drawer, and retrieved a thin, leather-bound ledger. "Follow me." He led us down a heavily secured corridor to a vault door taller than any I had seen. He scanned his badge, entered a code, and then inserted the swallow key into a discreet slot beside the main console. The vault clicked open. Cold, dry air washed over us. Inside were rows of safety deposit boxes, each labeled carefully. Reeves guided me to one on the far end. Box 72L. My mother's initials were etched on a metal tab. My fingers trembled as I turned the key. The box slid open smoothly, almost welcoming. Inside was a small wooden case tied with a silver ribbon. Reeves stepped back. "This is yours alone." I lifted it out and carried it to a nearby table. The ribbon unraveled easily. The lid opened with a soft sigh, like the last breath of the past escaping. Inside were three things: a flash drive, a sealed envelope, and a journal with a cracked leather cover. My breath hitched. Tom whispered, "Take your time." I reached for the envelope first, my mother's handwriting looping across the front. "Emma." For when it becomes too dangerous to stay silent. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to open it. Inside was a letter and a single sheet of printed names. Dozens of names. Business partners, investors, politicians, physicians. Every one of them connected to Clinton Wade or his shell companies. Everyone tied to the money laundering scheme. Mom's letter read, "Emma. If you're reading this, it means they've turned on you the way they turned on me. I am so sorry. I tried to fight quietly, but I realized too late they would not allow quiet to be enough. Everything they built is in this vault. Everything they fear is in your hands now. Do not trust your father. He is no longer the man you knew. Expose them. And when you're safe, live your life freely. Love, Mom." I pressed the letter against my chest, letting her words anchor me. Next, I opened the journal. It was filled with dates, notes, sketches of financial flows, and personal observations. The last few pages were shakier, the handwriting weaker. They are watching me. I cannot sleep. If anything happens, Emma must survive this. My throat closed. I turned to the flash drive last. "What's on it?" Marla asked softly. "We'll find out," I said. Reeves handed us a tablet connected to an isolated system. "It's safe to open here." Tom plugged in the drive. A single video file appeared. Mom's face filled the screen. She looked tired, ill, but determined. "Emma," she whispered, "if you're seeing this, they came for me, and they will come for you. They want the money, but that's not why I'm warning you. They want to erase the record of what they've done. You must not let them." She paused, breathing unevenly. I couldn't save myself, but I can help you save the truth. The video ended. Silence swallowed the room. My hands clenched around the table's edge. Fear didn't grip me now. Conviction did. Marla sat up straighter. This is enough to expose them. All of them. Tom placed a hand on my back. We can take this public. Today. Reeves looked between us. If you choose that path, Miss Harwood, you may be saving more than just yourself. His words steadied me. I'm ready. Marla opened her laptop, fingers moving with practiced speed. I'll upload everything to the station's server. By tonight, this will reach every major outlet. A sudden pounding shook the vault door. Dad's voice echoed faintly through the steel. Emma, don't do this. Reeves calmly engaged the security lock. They can't enter. But I stepped closer to the door, my voice steady. You made your choice, Dad. This is mine. The pounding stopped. I turned back to Marla. Let's finish it. We walked out of Westline with police escorts, the flash drive in Marla's pocket, and the truth finally free from its hiding place. By evening, every news station in the city played my mother's recordings, the documents, the financial trails, the connections. Arrests began before midnight. Clinton Wade, members of his network, even my father. The weight of everything lifted slowly, not in one dramatic moment, but in breaths, small ones, steady ones, until I realized I could finally inhale without fear. A week later, I visited Mom's grave with a single white rose and whispered, "It's over. I hope I made you proud." As I walked away, snow drifted across the stone, soft and quiet. For the first time, it didn't feel cold. And if you've stayed with me through all of this, thank you. Stories like mine matter because truth matters, and because no one deserves to face their battles alone. If this journey meant something to you, I hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe. We share these stories to remind each other that strength grows in the places we least expect. I'll see you in the next story.